It's me, Wards. As you know, I work most efficiently when the sequence is followed. I read from beginning to end, not because I like it, but because skipping lines would make things go wrong. If the steps are followed, I expect a file to finish. Grimm never waits for the end. He paced back and forth while I read, occasionally cracking jokes, laughing a little too soon, then silently looking around the corners of the room as if something might change. He had habits that looked superstitious, but mostly for avoidance. Mara was the opposite. She treated each task like a loop. If a line didn't finish the record, she'd repeat it. She'd rerun the check steps without a care, as if repetition were the only honest response to an open file. The file before me is labeled Planet 7. A survey team had previously deployed along an approved route with clearly defined objectives, complete documentation, and all necessary confirmations attached. Their movement logs were intact, their measurements had been submitted, checklists were checked, all permits were present, no forms were pending, no steps were missing, no approvals were unresolved. According to procedure, the file should have been closed. Instead, it remained active. The status line didn't change no matter how many times I refreshed. On paper, the work was complete. The system still refused to process it as such. The problem wasn't an isolated incident. It recurred across multiple seemingly clean entries. The previous survey team hadn't completed the assigned route. They had only completed a few verification points. They stored their last routine notes, and then, sometimes hours later, the file would add another short line from an automated medical alert: suicide. No distress calls, no arguments in the communication log, no escalating triggers. The recorded circumstances were logical and individual, each different, each normal enough to avoid immediate suspicion. Grimm stopped pacing when he saw this pattern. He leaned over my shoulder longer than necessary, then backed away without explaining. Mara asked about the timestamp twice and began listing the 3 checks she always made when a file wouldn't close. I hadn't answered her yet. I just stared at the final confirmed line and tried to understand how an entire group could have perished for the same reason: suicide. I opened the environment section first, not out of habit, but because this is where the obvious cause usually appears. Planet 7 was listed as stable and easily observable. Gravity was within the range, allowing for normal standing and walking. The atmosphere supported air filtration without time limitations. Temperature followed a predictable day-night cycle without sudden drops. Light was noted as clear and stable over long periods, with visibility remaining high above open ground. The terrain was described as solid and usable, with no hazards requiring protective measures beyond standard equipment. I stopped and reread that page. Nothing in it suggested an environment that could push a person to a state of breakdown, confusion, or despair. The profile contained no warnings about toxins, pressure, sound, isolation effects, or anything that could justify the automatic escalation of mental health issues. If the profile ended there, it would be normal. I switched to the validation sequence because the next common error was inaccurate measurements. The recording was very thorough. Remote scans were repeated. Low-altitude flights confirmed the same area. Surface inspections were recorded periodically, and the numbers remained consistent where they were repeated. Equipment performance remained normal. Position tracking remained continuous throughout the movement. Communication quality was good, with no lag and no signal loss. The recording didn't rely on a single sensor or operator. It used overlap. It used redundancy. Mara would instinctively trust this part. She repeatedly performed the same validation steps every time a file failed to close, and here the steps were repeated within the file itself. In contrast, Grimm didn't look at the numbers when he felt uneasy. He observed margins, gaps between entries, sections that looked too neat. I did the opposite. I traced the sequence and confirmed that there were no gaps in the process where a hidden event could have occurred. Then I went to the survey history section, and this is where Planet 7 showed itself. Each deployment looked like a normal mission. Arrived, route tracked, objective completed, routine notes sent. Nothing in the entries sounded stressful. No one requested cancellation. No one requested support. No arguments appeared in the logs. The final activity line was always calm and complete, the kind of line that usually appears before archiving. And then the record added another entry that didn't belong to a completed mission:
a medical flag that subsequently self-destructed. In one instance, it happened during equipment packing. Another instance involved an isolated moment recorded as normal and brief. The circumstances were so different they seemed unrelated, and that's what kept the file open. All the bodies were found in a state of self-inflicted death, with no signs of struggle, no signs of a fight. Each death was recorded as possibly occurring in isolation. Together, they formed a pattern without a specific cause. Then the system couldn't escalate anything further because no danger was recorded, no interference was recorded, and no incident was recorded. Just a decision made by people who, minutes before, had been writing routine notes as if they wanted to go home. Grim stopped pacing behind me. Mara had prepared her tools, repeating the only remaining steps: descend to the planet and verify visually. I marked the file as reviewed and requested deployment to the surface. Planet 7 cannot be shut down from a desk.
The landing process began without any elaborate ceremony. The mothership remained stationary while the capsules separated, the transition so smooth that the instruments registered it before my body even felt it. 5 names were confirmed for the landing on Planet 7. Myself, Mara, Grim, and 2 assigned escorts. No one spoke during the separation. Grim tightened his harness once, then let it sit, his eyes fixed on the indicator light above the capsule door. Mara checked the environmental control panel, closed it, then opened it again to confirm the same values. The 2 escorts remained still, their hands near their instruments. The capsule landed with a controlled impact. When the capsule door opened, the air felt neutral. Breathing through the filter was easy. Light spread evenly across the ground. I stepped out last and accurately recorded the existing conditions. We began moving along the approved route without delay. The ground was firm and level, supporting our weight without adjustment. One escort went ahead, the other behind, maintaining distance more habitually than directed. Mara kept us aligned with the markers, making small adjustments without disrupting our rhythm. Grim stepped slightly out of formation, careful not to get so close that our balls overlapped. When the angle of light changed, he shifted again, widening the distance without saying anything. I noticed it, but didn't ask. Nothing in the surroundings demanded caution. That absence matched the record. The first checkpoint appeared precisely at the location recorded in the record. We stopped, confirmed the position, and continued moving. Communication remained clear. Equipment status remained normal. At the second checkpoint, the rear escort paused briefly to adjust his harness, stepping aside a short distance to make space for himself. This action was routine. The delay lasted only a few seconds. He finished, nodded, and rejoined the formation. Grim glanced down at the ground where the escort had just stood, then continued on. The lighting remained unchanged. Long, sharp shadows stretched across the surface, darker than I had imagined under this level of illumination, but steady. I noted the time and continued. At the third checkpoint, we stopped again. The rear escort signaled a brief check once more and walked, this time a little further than before, toward a low mound of earth with no particular advantage. No one objected. While he worked, the rest remained in place. When I turned back to confirm readiness, he was standing upright, relaxed, his equipment securely fastened. He didn't turn around. Without rushing, he began walking away from us at a steady pace. I called his name once. He only nodded in acknowledgement. He reached the edge of the mound and stopped. For a moment, he stood alone. Then he slowly lowered himself and completed the work without hesitation. There was no struggle, no sign of discomfort. The equipment remained in place. We remained stationary at our resting place. The hill obscured our view just enough for the guide to disappear as he passed the summit, not abruptly, but slowly, his upper body vanishing first, then the rest. The elevation was higher than a standing man, but not too steep, just enough to disrupt our vision. He didn't signal after passing. At first, that didn't make sense. The delay was within the route's permissible limits. We waited. The light remained unchanged. The ground beneath us didn't move. No alarms appeared on my screen. Grim stood rigidly behind me, careful not to move forward, his eyes fixed on the edge of the hill rather than the ground. The silence lasted longer than expected, not long enough to warrant urgency, but long enough to be noticeable. I called the escort once, no response. I called again, still nothing. Mara approached the hill, pausing before the summit, surveying the angle without fully revealing herself. From our position, we still couldn't see anything behind us. The environment remained quiet. There was no sign of interference. Grim stepped back into the direct light, then paused, as if correcting a mistake too late. I noted that delay as a minor deviation and continued forward. We crossed the mound together. On the other side, the escort stood precisely where the path continued, his back to us. His posture was upright and relaxed. His equipment was still held firmly. For a moment, it seemed he was simply waiting. Then I saw the air filter in his hand, detached and tossed to the ground. The system log automatically updated after a while, marking the action as a manual disconnection. No warning, no forced override, no sign of panic. He just stood there, motionless. By the time we reached him, placed our hands on his shoulders, and turned him around, a scene unfolded before us. His face was deathly pale, his eyes wide open, showing no sign of breathing, and his body suddenly collapsed. Immediately, I grabbed the air filter and put it on his face, but it was too late. He had stopped breathing, showing no signs of life. The time was recorded, the location was marked, the ground around him was undisturbed, the equipment showed no signs of malfunction. There was nothing to suggest coercion or external interference. Grim didn't approach any closer. He stood a few steps away, his shadow not covering his entire body, staring more at the surrounding space than at the man himself. Mara checked the indicators once, then again, and found nothing new. I completed the entry using the same language as the previous files. Self-destructing, under stable conditions, with no identifiable cause. We left the marked spot without saying a word about it. The path led us forward, and we followed it because nothing in the record allowed for a pause. The formation remained tight. I constantly recorded the rhythm, tracking our movements so there would be no gaps that would need to be reinterpreted later. The terrain ahead was divided into a jagged stretch where the ground opened into long, shallow fissures running parallel to our path. It was noted as stable but not flat, already classified and accepted. We slowed down slightly and placed each step carefully. The light was still strong, illuminating every nook and cranny and leaving sharp outlines for the shadows. Grim walked just inside the formation, more silent than before. He glanced back once, not at the bodies we left behind, but at the space itself, as if expecting it to return to its original position. But it did not. The remaining escort led the way through the jagged path, checking each step before shifting his weight. His movements were controlled and unhurried. There was nothing to suggest risk. While I was still finishing my previous notes, Grim muttered something, seemingly to himself rather than to anyone else. He said that the shadow ahead appeared to have reached the gap before the man. The words were so indistinct that I almost didn't hear them clearly, and when I looked up, the escort had shifted his weight forward. The misstep was minimal. There was no slip, no collapse of the ground, no sudden jolt worthy of a shout. His foot landed too close to the edge. He lost his balance, and inertia propelled him forward. He plunged into the gap in a single motion, faster than our reaction time. We reached the edge of the abyss in seconds. The chasm was deeper than it appeared from above. Its smooth walls where the ground had eroded. The body lay below, motionless, in a posture consistent with a forward fall. The ground around the edge of the chasm was undisturbed, except for a single row of footprints leading to where he lost his balance. As I began taking notes, I noticed something else. It happened so quickly, in the blink of an eye, the shadow stretching from the crevice didn't break or disappear with the fall. It receded, thinning, and lay still on the dark slope of a nearby rock, as if it had always belonged there. We secured the surrounding area and completed our inspection.
The equipment showed no signs of malfunction. There were no signs of being pushed or forced to move. The hazard was noted, the class classified as an accident and avoidable under current guidelines. Grimm stepped away from the edge of the cliff, standing in a position where the light shattered his shadow on the rough ground. He didn't mention what he had noticed again. Mara finished the measurements and waited for me to close the file. 2 loss cases, different circumstances, both clearly fit the categories the system understood. I allowed them to proceed. The road ahead remained open, and the file once again gave me no procedural reason to stop.
We continued our journey, now just 3 of us. The distance between us was now narrower, not because we agreed, but because no one was straying off course anymore. Mara led the way, Grimm in the middle, and I at the rear. The terrain ahead gradually flattened into a wide, compacted strip of land, punctuated here and there by thin, irregular lines that looked more like old cracks than active ones. They were recorded in the archives as shallow and unstable under normal loads. We slowed slightly but did not change direction. Grimm stopped near one of these lines, standing just outside the direct light, where his shadow was clearly visible on the surface. From my vantage point, the ground appeared unchanged. There was no sound, no movement, nothing to draw attention. He stood still longer than necessary, as if waiting for something to end. I noticed the pattern before I understood it. Grimm didn't look around. He didn't check his equipment. He didn't react when I called his name. He simply stood, his weight shifted to one side, his posture incongruously relaxed for the terrain. The path beneath his feet began to widen almost imperceptibly, cracking little by little. It happened so quickly it was visible to the naked eye. I didn't scream. There was no time to explain something I didn't even understand myself. Instinctively, I ran and pushed him from the side. Grimm fell heavily. The impact sent both of us tumbling onto the hard ground, a considerable distance from the crack. In front of us, the ground finally collapsed. The narrow crack widened into a sinkhole, the kind that a standing person would fall straight into without resistance. Grimm lay on his side, dazed, gasping for breath, but still alive. For a moment, he seemed unaware of his surroundings. His eyes searched for my face, a look of bewilderment on his face, then glanced down at the ground beside us. He asked what had happened. He didn't remember stopping. He didn't remember standing there. The ground stabilized again and became still. The crack had completed its task, leaving a clean break where Grimm had stood moments before. I noted this event as a near accident due to surface instability, noting the delayed collapse and the lack of clear warning signs. Grimm slowly sat up, rubbing his shoulder, insisting he was fine, just lost his balance. There was a gap in his narrative that he didn't realize. Mara observed him intently but said nothing. I helped Grimm to his feet and led him toward the light. We only stopped after Grimm had calmed down, not because any procedure required it, but because none of us were willing to move while the situation was still unstable. I chose a well-lit open space with no edges that would force us to stand in one fixed position. Grimm sat down slowly, catching his breath. I recorded the near-fatal incident while it was still fresh, maintaining the exact language of the procedure. When I finished, silence fell. No one rushed to break it. Whatever had just happened couldn't be neatly documented yet, and we all knew that. Grimm spoke first. He turned back to the first escort, to the moment before that man died. He said what puzzled him wasn't the act itself, but how the man had changed beforehand. He hadn't looked around, hadn't checked his equipment. He didn't even shift his body weight as people usually do when about to move. He stood still for too long, not looking at anything in particular. Grimm said his posture was wrong, too rigid, as if he had already completed a task. And then there was the timing, the way he removed the oxygen mask without the slightest hesitation, without the slightest hint of doubt you usually see. No rush, no emotion, just precision, as if the decision didn't belong in the moment it happened. Grimm said that's what lingered in him, the contradiction, as if everything had been prearranged and the body simply followed. When Grimm finished, I talked about the second death, about how different it looked and how similar it felt when you disregard the superficial details. I described the fall, the location, the fact that the danger had been noted long before we arrived.
nothing unexpected, nothing that needed to escalate. It was just a fleeting moment of shadow, neither human nor the shadow of an escort. Then I focused back on Grim. I described what I had seen earlier, how he stopped reacting, his posture out of sync with the ground below, how he stood in a place that didn't require stillness, yet remained in that position. I said I didn't yet know what it meant, but I knew it was inseparable. Grim tried to recall the moment, but couldn't. There was a gap where memory should have been, and he didn't even realize it until I pointed it out. Mara listened without interrupting. When we were finished, she said she hadn't seen anything like that. No unusual behavior, no common signal that could pass a thorough examination. To her, deaths were separate events, explained by different causes. If she read the report remotely, she would agree with the conclusions drawn. She asked exactly what we thought linked them together. I didn't offer her a mechanism. I just said that whatever was happening didn't seem to be pressing. It was waiting. It appeared when someone was calm, unpressured, had accomplished what they had to do. If that was true, that it wasn't something we could pursue directly. It was something we could let it unfold on its own. We didn't call it a plan. We didn't define a method. We just agreed that the next time those conditions formed, we wouldn't let them slip through our fingers.
We remained in the same spot. No one suggested moving, and no one objected. The ground had stabilized. The crack had done its job. Grim leaned against the rock, turning his shoulder once, then again, to check. He complained about the collision, about my arrival, about me not calling ahead. His voice was even, irritated in a familiar way. After a while, he moved closer to the rock and stood in its shadow, resting there as if even the light itself had grown weary. He looked harmless, natural, a kind of silence that no one could capture. And for a moment, I watched him stop moving. It wasn't sudden. Grim wasn't stiff or tense. He simply stood still in a way that didn't seem like he was resting. His gaze swept over me instead of stopping at any particular spot. When I called his name, he answered, but a beat slower, as if he needed to find the words first. He smiled, his expression unfocused, a goofy grin, and asked what I was looking at. His posture was stable, his weight balanced, too perfect for such rough ground. I didn't wait for him to say anything more. I grabbed him and yanked him out into the open space, dragging him a few steps into the cleared ground where the light was even and uninterrupted. He protested, confused, asking what the hell I was doing. I didn't let go. I held him there, my hands locked onto his arms, forcing him to stand straight and move. That's when Mara came in. She said nothing. She took the first reflector and placed it low, between the rock and the ground Grim had just left, tilting it so the light streamed out, illuminating Grim's shadow. Part of the shadow disappeared neatly. The rest didn't function as usual. Its edge curved inward, then pulled outward again, as if the shadow had a human quality. Grim fell silent mid-sentence, his jaw clenched, and his eyes, for a split second, bulged, as if a sudden pressure had struck him. He grabbed my forearm, squeezing hard, a grip that shocked me for a second, a grip that wasn't human. I screamed in pain. Mara placed the second reflector faster, expanding the illuminated surface and shining deeper into the remaining shadow. The shadow reacted violently this time, releasing my hand, not lunging forward, not fleeing, but collapsing into itself. Its form warped and folded, lagging behind the light instead of catching up. A thin layer of mist began to rise from the shadow's location, pale and uneven, swirling like smoke rising from something too hot. The stronger the light, the thinner the shadow became, until its form completely dissolved. The thick mist rose for a moment, then dissipated into the air, leaving nothing but the bare ground and reflected light. Grim fell when it was all over. Not a fall, just a sudden heaviness, as if something had let go. I helped him sit down, holding him until his breathing stabilized. He blinked sharply,
took a deep breath, and looked around, disoriented. When his eyes fell to the ground, the shadow beneath his feet was his again, normal, clinging.